I stood in the wings, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The sequined gown glittered like 1,000 stars, but all I felt was a bone-deep cold. The roar of the audience was a savage tide, pulling me toward the stage. In minutes, I was to step into the spotlight, where the brilliant lights and thunderous applause awaited. This was the opening night of Echoes of the City, the fulfillment of my life's dream, and the dream of my husband, Julian, the show's director. We had spent 5 years building toward this moment, and I was ready to give it everything I had. I peered through a small gap in the velvet curtain, searching for Julian's gaze. He was there, adjusting an earpiece for a sound technician. The tension on his face melted away as he said something, and they both shared a laugh. I smiled, feeling a familiar warmth spread through me. Then, a single sentence, cold and venomous, cut through the music and the roaring cheers. After her accident, with that insurance money, we'll never have to worry about cash again. The voice wasn't Julian's, but the technician's. But the reply, Julian's own voice, was warm and self-satisfied. Exactly. Just make sure it looks like an accident. No one will suspect a thing. She trusts me completely. The smile on my face vanished. My heart seemed to stop. My entire world, the stage, the lights, the love, shattered in that single instant. The cold I had felt from the sequins was nothing compared to the shiver that ran through my soul. My script was no longer a musical. It was a tragedy, and I was the unsuspecting star. I stood there, frozen, a brittle smile still plastered on my face, but inside, a new plan was already forming. A plan not for acting, but for survival and justice. I married Julian 2 years ago, but our story began 5 years earlier. I was a hopeful performer with nothing but a soaring voice and a fierce hunger to make it on Broadway. My family was a simple, loving one, not a single trust fund or a well-connected relative among them. Every penny I made from small-town shows and local theater gigs was carefully saved, a small nest egg for a future I was fighting for with every fiber of my being. When I met Julian, he was a struggling director. Brilliant and full of big ideas, but chronically underfunded. He was the first person who truly saw me. He didn't see the girl with the small-town accent or the worn-out dance shoes. He saw the potential for a star. He was so convincing, so passionate about his craft, that I trusted him implicitly. Julian told me his latest project, a musical called Echoes of the City, was his magnum opus, but he couldn't get the big investors to take him seriously. He needed a little push, a little faith. And I, naive and head over heels in love, offered him my entire life savings. I saw it as a partnership, a chance to build our dreams together. He convinced me to sign a substantial performance insurance policy as part of my contract for the lead role. He said it was standard for Broadway leads, a way to protect my future earnings and my family in case of an accident. It's what responsible couples do, Elise, he'd said, his eyes full of concern. I'll always protect you. I didn't question it. Why would I? I was living a fairy tale with my knight in shining armor, a genius director who believed in me more than anyone ever had. He was my partner in art and in life, or so I believed. All the warnings I'd received had been subtle, easy to dismiss. My best friend had pointed out that Julian seemed overly interested in the dangerous stunts in our show, the elaborate wire work, and the precarious stage props. I'd brushed it off, telling her it was just Julian's artistic vision, his pursuit of perfection. He would suggest we go rock climbing or try extreme sports on our weekends, all activities that made me uncomfortable. I had thought he was just being adventurous. Looking back, I see now he was a predator, scouting for a weakness, an opportunity, a fatal mistake. The beautiful facade he had built was a stage, and I was just a prop in his horrifying play. The world of glittering sequins and velvet curtains dissolved into a stark, silent void. Julian's voice, a melody I once adored, now twisted into a sinister echo in my mind. He was plotting to hurt me. Not in an emotional way, but physically. He was planning a stage accident to collect my insurance money. My hands, which were just moments ago trembling with excitement, now trembled with a cold, paralyzing terror. I stood there, a ghost in my own body, watching him through the curtain gap. He smiled, a perfect, dazzling smile that had captivated me, and now I saw it for what it truly was: a mask. I replayed every conversation, every moment in my head, a horrifying montage of betrayals I had been too blind to see. The way he had insisted on a more dangerous, complicated finale for our show. The way his eyes had gleamed when he described the dizzying wire work and the precarious props. He hadn't been an artist. He had been a predator, meticulously setting a trap. I was not his leading lady. I was a casualty, a means to an end. The performance insurance he had so lovingly encouraged me to sign was a death sentence. The man I had loved and trusted with my life was a calculated murderer. I felt a faint tug on my sleeve. It was the stage manager, her face a blur of impatient concern. "Elise, you're on in 2 minutes. The overture is almost over," she whispered urgently. I nodded, a robotic movement that didn't reach my eyes. My heart was a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. I walked toward the stage, my body moving on instinct, but my mind was a raging storm. Julian was standing at the side of the stage, his perfect smile fixed on me as I passed. "Break a leg, my love," he mouthed, his eyes full of a chilling, triumphant anticipation. He was looking at me not as a wife, but as a jackpot, a walking lottery ticket that would soon pay out. My feet carried me to the center of the stage. The lights blinded me. The applause deafened me, but none of it could drown out the chilling whispers in my mind. Julian's words. I looked into the sea of faces in the audience, searching for a single friendly face. My parents, who had sacrificed so much for my dream, were sitting in the front row, their eyes shining with pride. Seeing them, a new wave of resolve washed over me. I couldn't let Julian's evil plan succeed. I would not become a victim, a footnote in his selfish story. As the first notes of my song filled the theater, I began to sing. But it was not the soaring, joyful voice I was known for. It was a voice filled with a silent, simmering rage. Every high note was a cry of anguish, every soft verse a promise of a reckoning. My performance was no longer about art. It was a desperate, silent message to myself. I am alive. I will not break. I will not let you win. I moved through the choreography with the precision of a trained dancer, but I was not dancing. I was fighting, twisting my body to avoid the very props Julian had so carefully designed. I saw the confused look on Julian's face as I effortlessly navigated what was meant to be a dangerous, life-ending scene. I was no longer an innocent victim. I was a survivor, and my revenge had already begun. The curtain fell, and the world saw a triumphant star. But I saw a woman who had just walked out of a grave. The next hour passed in a blur. The adrenaline that had propelled me through the performance began to fade, replaced by a cold, numbing horror. I accepted flowers, gave interviews, and hugged well-wishers, my face a carefully constructed mask of gratitude and joy. All the while, my mind was racing, trying to process the impossible truth. My husband, The man I had given my savings and my heart to had been planning to kill me. He hadn't seen me as his wife, his partner, his muse. I had been nothing more than a resource, a stepping stone. Back in the dressing room, the celebratory atmosphere felt like a sick joke. Cast members laughed, producers toasted with champagne. Julian walked in, his face flushed with success. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, kissing my neck. His touch, once a comfort, now felt like a viper's embrace. "You were magnificent, my love," he whispered. "The critics are going wild. It's everything we dreamed of." I turned in his arms, forcing a small smile. "Yes, it is," I said, the words feeling foreign and heavy on my tongue. Inside, a part of me died. I was looking at a stranger, a monster wearing my husband's face. As the room cleared out, Julian sat down next to me, taking my hand. "Let's go home, Elise," he said. "We can pack for our trip tomorrow." My mind flashed to the trip he had planned for us, a week-long getaway to a remote mountain cabin he said would be perfect to celebrate our success. Now, I understood. It wasn't a celebration. It was a prearranged exit, a place where an accident could happen with no witnesses. A tremor ran through me. "I'm not feeling well, Julian," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The show was more draining than I thought. I think I just want to stay home and rest." His perfect facade cracked for a split second. A flash of annoyance crossed his features, quickly replaced by a saccharine concern. "Of course, my love. Whatever you need," he said, but his eyes were calculating. He was already rethinking his plan, adjusting the pieces on his chessboard. He left to tie up loose ends with the producers, promising to return soon. As soon as he was gone, the mask I was wearing fell away. I collapsed into a chair, the tears I had been holding back finally breaking free. He wanted me dead. The reality of it was a physical blow, leaving me breathless and gasping for air. Every moment of our marriage, every kind word, every loving gesture was a lie. He had wooed me, married me, and convinced me to risk my life for a show he was using as a vehicle for my demise. I had been a fool, a walking, singing, dancing fool, but I was no longer that fool. My tears dried, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I stood up, walked to my closet, and began to pack. Not for a romantic getaway, but for an escape. I needed to disappear. I couldn't confront him, not yet. He was a dangerous man, and his cunning was far greater than my naivete. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. I would vanish, and from the shadows, I would plot my revenge. My wedding ring, a symbol of a promise now shattered, felt like a shackle on my finger. I twisted it off, a small act of defiance, and placed it on my dressing table. A glittering monument to a life that had been a beautiful lie. The past 2 years had been a mirage, a carefully constructed stage set. I thought I was living a fairy tale, but I was living in a cage. And now, I had to find a way out before the final curtain fell on me forever. I left the theater through a side door, melting into the bustling New York City night. The sequins on my gown caught the glare of streetlights, a stark contrast to the darkness I was now entering. I didn't go home. Home was a trap, a stage where Julian held all the power. I hailed a cab, giving the driver an address in a quiet, anonymous neighborhood I hadn't visited in years. The ride was a silent journey, a physical and emotional disconnect from the life I had just fled. As the taxi moved through the city, I felt the last vestiges of the naive, trusting Elise peeling away, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. The tears were gone, replaced by a steely clarity. My mind, once filled with lyrics and choreography, was now a database of information I needed to process and act on. My first priority was to disappear. Julian would be back at the apartment soon, expecting to find me, perhaps with an excuse or an apology, ready to restart his cruel game. But I wouldn't be there. I checked into a small, nondescript hotel under my maiden name, paying in cash I had stashed away years ago for emergencies. It was a meager sum, but it would get me through the next few days. My new identity, a forgotten part of my past, felt like a shield. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of hyper-awareness, my every action deliberate and methodical. I bought a cheap prepaid phone and a new set of clothes from a nearby department store. I threw away the expensive sequined gown, a symbol of the life I had lost. I wore a simple black hoodie and jeans, a disguise that made me invisible in the city that was once my stage. Julian wouldn't be looking for this version of me. He would be looking for the star, the woman who needed him, the damsel in distress. But that woman was gone. My first real move was to secure my financial situation. Julian had access to our joint accounts, the same accounts where my life savings had disappeared to fund his artistic vision. I knew he would try to drain them, assuming I was dead or missing. But I had one ace up my sleeve, an old savings account my mother had insisted I keep separate, just in case. I had dismissed her advice as old-fashioned paranoia, but now it felt like a lifeline. I called the bank, discreetly transferring the small but crucial amount into a new, secure account that was entirely off Julian's radar. The second, and most critical step, was to gather evidence. Julian's plot wasn't just a betrayal, it was a criminal conspiracy. The technician who had spoken to him, the elaborate stage setup, the forged insurance papers, they were all part of a paper trail. I couldn't confront Julian directly. He was too smart, too manipulative. A direct confrontation would only give him the chance to cover his tracks and discredit me, painting me as an emotionally fragile, paranoid actress. I needed proof, concrete and irrefutable, to use as a weapon. My first target was the stage technician. I recalled his face, his voice, his nervous energy. I knew his name was Mike from overhearing Julian call him. With the new prepaid phone, I began making discreet calls. I didn't call him directly. I called the theater, pretending to be a journalist, asking for an interview about the technical brilliance of the show. I learned his schedule, his routine, and his frequent haunts. I found him in a small, dimly lit bar near the theater, nursing a beer. He looked haggard, his eyes darting around the room nervously. Guilt. I sat in a corner booth, observing him, crafting my approach. I didn't want to threaten him. I wanted to exploit his fear and his conscience. I sent a text message from my new phone. I know what you and Julian did. I have the recording. You have one chance to do the right thing. I watched as he read the message. His face went white. He stared at his phone, then frantically scanned the room. My plan was working. I sent another text. Meet me at the park tomorrow at noon. Come alone. I can make this go away. He showed up, looking terrified. I approached him, my face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke in a calm, controlled tone, my voice barely above a whisper. Julian didn't care about you, Mike. He saw you as a tool. He would have left you to take the fall. I told him I had a recording of their conversation, a lie that had the desired effect. You can either go down with him, or you can help me expose him. I want you to tell me everything, every detail of the plot, every change to the stage, every wire he had you tamper with. He hesitated, his eyes filled with fear and desperation. He'll kill me, he whispered. No, I said, my voice hardening. He'll try to, but he can't if he's in jail. You have a chance to save yourself. You have a chance to tell the truth." He broke, tears streaming down his face, and began to talk. I recorded every word on my new phone. My next step was to contact my lawyer, a woman named Sarah, whom I had met years ago through a mutual friend. Sarah was known for her sharp legal mind and her fierce dedication to her clients. I couldn't call her from my new phone. That was too risky. I used a public payphone, my voice disguised with a low, husky whisper. "Sarah, this is Elise. I need to meet you." "In a place no one will ever find me." Her silence on the other end was a testament to her professionalism. "I understand," she said simply. "I'll be there." We met in an abandoned warehouse by the docks, a location straight out of a spy movie. But it was the only place I felt safe. I told her everything, from the night of the show to my conversation with Mike. I played the recording for her, watching as her face, usually so composed, shifted from disbelief to cold fury. She was not just my lawyer. She was a woman who had seen the darker side of men, and she was not about to let me become another victim. "He's a monster," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "But we will beat him, Elise. We will find every piece of evidence, every loophole, and we will make him pay." With Sarah on my side, my plan of quiet revenge began to take shape. I gave her the recording of Mike's confession, and she began a full investigation. She had a private investigator on her payroll, a former police detective with a knack for finding things people wanted to keep hidden. He began digging into Julian's finances, his phone records, his past relationships. I knew he had a history of lying and manipulation. I just didn't know how deep it went. I also began to document my own side of the story. I wrote everything down, from the moment I met Julian to the night I fled. I detailed every conversation, every promise, every small lie that had added up to this grand betrayal. I wrote about the contract he had me sign, the absurdly high insurance policy he had insisted on, the subtle ways he had tried to put me in danger. I wrote about the dreams I had sacrificed for him, the life savings I had given him, the trust I had so foolishly placed in his hands. It wasn't just a journal. It was a legal document, a testimony, a weapon against the man who had tried to erase me. My silence, once a sign of my weakness, was now my greatest strength. Julian was still at our apartment, likely drinking, wondering where I had gone, perhaps enjoying the brief period of peace he assumed was the calm before his grand insurance payday. He would think I was weak, afraid, lost. He would think I was a fool who would eventually come back, crying and begging for his forgiveness. He would think I had no fight left in me. But he was wrong. Every time I felt a pang of fear or sadness, I thought of Julian's smug smile and his callous words. Every time I felt like giving up, I thought of the future I had almost lost, the beautiful stage I had almost been killed on. I wasn't fighting for revenge. I was fighting for my life, my dignity, and my future. My anger, once a hot flame of fury, had settled into a cold, hard stone in my heart, a stone that would not be moved. I was a survivor, and my greatest performance was yet to come. I was ready to take the stage and bring down the house. My time in the shadows was over. The stage was set, the players were in place, and Julian was about to find out that the final act of this play belonged to me. The anonymous hotel room, the prepaid phone, the stolen moments of fear and grief, all of it had served its purpose. I had not been hiding. I had been preparing. My silence was a tool, a way to make him comfortable, to let him believe he had won. He thought I was a broken woman, but I was a hunter, and he was the prey. My lawyer, Sarah, and her private investigator, Carlos, had been working tirelessly. The evidence they had compiled was a masterpiece of legal and financial forensics. It wasn't just Mike's confession, it was a web of deceit far wider than I could have imagined. Carlos had uncovered Julian's hidden gambling addiction, his massive debts, and a secret offshore account he'd been siphoning money into for years. He had also found evidence that Julian had been trying to manipulate me into changing my will, and had even tried to buy off another stagehand to cause a minor equipment failure that would have left me with a career-ending injury. The accident on opening night was just one of many attempts. The insurance policy, which I had believed was for my protection, was merely the grand prize in his twisted game. The time had come to reveal the truth, but I knew I couldn't do it in a way that would allow Julian to control the narrative. I wouldn't just file a police report. I would orchestrate a public and legal reckoning. I wanted the world to see him for the monster he was. My first strategic move was to schedule a meeting with the board of directors for the musical. Julian had a seat on the board, but the power ultimately rested with the investors who had bankrolled the show. They were a shrewd, no-nonsense group of financiers who cared about one thing: the show's success. I knew they would listen to reason, especially when that reason was backed by a mountain of evidence. I walked into the meeting room, a woman transformed. Gone was the anxious, eager-to-please actress. In her place was a cool, collected businesswoman. I was wearing a simple, tailored suit, my hair pulled back in a severe bun. My voice was calm, my expression unreadable. Julian was there, his face a mask of smug confidence. He smiled at me, a condescending smirk that said, "Look who came crawling back." I ignored him completely, taking my seat at the far end of the long conference table. The meeting began with a discussion of the show's glowing reviews. Julian, ever the showman, basked in the praise, painting a picture of his genius. I let him have his moment, my silence a powerful weapon. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't mince words. "I have a different matter to discuss," I began, my voice clear and steady. "It concerns a serious breach of contract, financial fraud, and a conspiracy to commit a crime." Julian's smug expression faltered. A hush fell over the room. I motioned for Sarah to come forward. She placed a large binder on the table in front of each board member. The binder contained everything: Mike's recorded confession, a transcript of the conversation, Carlos's financial reports showing the offshore accounts and gambling debts, and a timeline of Julian's attempts to orchestrate a stage accident. I laid out the case meticulously, not with anger or emotion, but with the precision of a prosecutor. I explained how Julian had used my life savings to fund his addiction, how he had manipulated me into signing the insurance policy, and how he had been plotting my demise to collect the payout. The board members, a group of powerful men and women who had seen it all, were stunned into silence. Their faces, which had been so full of celebratory cheer just moments ago, were now a mix of shock and disgust. Julian's face, on the other hand, was a spectacle of disbelief, rage, and dawning terror. He tried to interrupt, to scream, to deny everything, but Sarah, with a single sharp word, shut him down. "Any further interruptions, Mr. Thorne, and we will be forced to have you removed by security." The threat was enough to make him shrink back into his chair. As the board members flipped through the pages, their eyes widened with each new revelation. The evidence was irrefutable. I wasn't just a spurned wife. I was a key witness to a series of federal crimes. I concluded my presentation with a clear demand. I want Julian Thorne removed from his position as director, stripped of all creative rights and financial interest in the show, and I want his insurance claim to be immediately denied and investigated for fraud. I am also filing for divorce and will be taking all of this information to the New York Police Department and the FBI. The board, after a brief tense huddle, agreed. They had too much to lose to protect a man who was clearly a liability. Julian's empire, which had been built on my talent and money, crumbled in a single hour. He stormed out of the room, a shell of the man he once was, his threats echoing down the hallway. But his rage was impotent. He was cornered, with no allies and no escape. My counterattack didn't stop there. I scheduled a press conference, but not to tell my sob story. I wanted to tell the world the truth, in my own words. The press conference was held at a small, independent theater, a subtle nod to my beginnings. I stood at the podium, surrounded by my legal team, a single spotlight illuminating my face. The room was packed with journalists, their cameras flashing like 1,000 tiny lightning strikes. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I spoke with the calm, quiet authority of a woman who had been to hell and back. I told them about the love I thought I had, the trust I had placed in a man who saw me as a means to an end. I explained in detail how he had tried to ruin my life, not with words, but with a calculated, cold-blooded plan. I played a snippet of the recorded conversation between Julian and the sound technician, letting his own voice be the final nail in his coffin. The journalists, who were expecting a scandal, got a crime story, and it was devastatingly effective. The next day, the headlines screamed about Julian Thorne's betrayal and fraud. His reputation, the one thing he had valued above all else, was destroyed. Julian tried to fight back. He went on television, painting me as an unstable, paranoid woman. He tried to use his charisma to spin the story in his favor. But the world had already seen the evidence. The court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict, and the legal system was right behind it. Sarah had already filed a lawsuit, and the police were moving in. He was a man who had manipulated his way to the top, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions. He was a hollow shell, a man without a stage, without an audience, and without a future. My revenge was not a single, grand act. It was a methodical, ruthless dismantling of every single lie Julian had ever told. I had used my silence, my intelligence, and my resources to turn the tables on him. He had thought of me as a pawn in his game. But I had been the queen all along, and I had just checkmated him. The final curtain was falling, not on me, but on him. And the applause I heard in my mind was not for an actress, but for a survivor. I had not just escaped, I had won. The legal battle that followed was swift and decisive. Julian's carefully constructed world, built on lies and manipulation, collapsed like a house of cards. The board of directors had not only removed him from the show, but had also initiated a full financial audit, revealing a web of embezzlement and fraud that went far beyond what I had initially discovered. Sarah, with her sharp legal mind, filed for an emergency freeze on his assets, including the offshore account Carlos had found. The police and the FBI, armed with my testimony and the mountain of evidence, moved in. The man who had once stood so tall and proud on the Broadway stage was now a broken figure, his perfect facade shattered, facing federal charges and public disgrace. As Julian's world imploded, mine was slowly, meticulously being rebuilt. The divorce was a formality. I refused any settlement, choosing to walk away with nothing but my name and my dignity. I wanted no part of his tainted fortune. The money I had invested in his show, my life savings, was a loss I was willing to bear. It was a small price to pay for my freedom and my life. The feeling of cutting the last tie with him, of signing the final document, was not one of relief, but of liberation. I was no longer Julian's wife, his muse, or his victim. I was simply Elise, The press, of course, had a field day. They sensationalized the story, creating a narrative of the innocent star betrayed by her evil director husband. I gave a few carefully worded interviews, but I made sure the focus was not on the drama, but on the crime. I spoke about the importance of protecting one's financial independence and trusting one's instincts. I became a voice for women who had been manipulated and gaslit, but I didn't let the media define me. I was not a victim, but a survivor, and I had no intention of letting my story end on a sour note. The fame and sympathy were overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't stay in New York. The city was a constant reminder of my betrayal, of the beautiful stage that had almost become my grave. I needed to heal, to find a place where I could be just Elise, not the betrayed Broadway star. I packed my few belongings and left. I went back to my roots, to the small, anonymous town where I had grown up. I found a dilapidated old dance studio, a place that held the ghosts of my childhood dreams. It was dusty, neglected, and forgotten. It was perfect. I used the last of my savings to buy the studio. With my own 2 hands, I began to restore it. I sanded the floors, painted the walls, and replaced the broken mirrors. The process was not just a physical one. It was a spiritual one. Every brushstroke was a rejection of Julian's deceit. Every piece of wood I restored was a piece of my own soul I was putting back together. I found a profound sense of peace in the physical labor, in the quiet solitude of the studio. I wasn't performing for an audience. I was performing for myself. As the studio took shape, so did my new life. I began offering dance classes to the local children. Their laughter, their energy, their pure, unadulterated passion for movement reminded me of why I had fallen in love with the stage in the first place. I taught them not just choreography, but discipline, resilience, and the power of storytelling through movement. I taught them that the stage was a sacred space, a place for creation and expression, not a tool for deceit. Word of my little studio spread, and soon, women from all walks of life began to show up. They were mothers, grandmothers, teachers, nurses. They came not just to learn to dance, but to talk, to share, to heal. I started a series of workshops, not just on dance, but on finding your voice. I used my own story as a cautionary tale, but also as a source of strength. I talked about financial independence, about setting boundaries, about trusting one's intuition, and about the importance of not dimming your own light for someone else's ego. My small studio became a sanctuary, a place where women could find their own stage, their own voice. I wasn't performing for the masses anymore, but I was touching lives, one person at a time. The work was fulfilling in a way that Broadway never was. I wasn't just a star. I was a mentor, a leader, a source of inspiration. I was building a community, a legacy. Julian, I heard through my lawyer, had fallen from grace completely. The show he had directed with such pride had been a critical success, but the financial scandal had tainted it forever. He was a pariah in the theater community, a man whose name was synonymous with betrayal and fraud. He had lost everything: his career, his reputation, his freedom. He tried to contact me, sending me pathetic, tearful emails full of empty apologies and promises to change. He said he had lost his way and that I was the only one who could save him. I deleted the emails without reading them. I wasn't his savior. I was his judge. His redemption was not my responsibility. My life, once a dazzling, chaotic mess of sequins and applause, had settled into a rhythm of quiet contentment. I would wake up every morning to the sound of birds, not the roar of the city. I would drink my coffee on the front porch of my studio, watching the sun rise. A new day full of possibilities. I was at peace. I had a purpose. I was no longer a character in someone else's play. I was the author of my own story. I was Elise, and I had finally, truly come home. The stage of my life has changed, but the performance is far from over. I am no longer a dancer on a Broadway stage, but I am a conductor of a different kind of symphony, one of resilience, healing, and empowerment. My studio, once a forgotten shell of a building, is now a vibrant center for women to rediscover themselves. We don't just teach dance, we teach courage. We don't just practice choreography, we practice reclaiming our power. I often share my story, not as a cautionary tale, but as a roadmap. I tell them about Julian, not to vilify him, but to illustrate a critical lesson. He didn't just betray me with a physical plot. He betrayed me by making me believe my worth was tied to him. He convinced me that my talent was his creation, that my success was his doing. He tried to dim my light so his could shine brighter. The most painful part of the betrayal wasn't the near-fatal accident he plotted. It was the 2 years I spent slowly, unknowingly, erasing myself for him. That is the legacy I want to leave behind. I want to teach every woman who walks through my studio doors that her value is intrinsic, not derived from a partner, a boss, or a contract. I teach them about the importance of financial independence. I tell them to always have a separate account, a secret fund, a little nest egg that is theirs and theirs alone. I remind them that a partner should be a collaborator, not a project, and a relationship should be a partnership, not a prison. I also teach them to trust their intuition. I explain that those small, nagging doubts I had about Julian's adventurous hobbies and the overly complex stage stunts were not paranoia. They were my inner voice, my survival instinct, trying to warn me. I encourage them to listen to that voice, to honor it, and to never dismiss it for the sake of keeping the peace. My journey from the Broadway stage to this small-town studio has been a masterclass in self-discovery. I thought my dream was to be a star, but my true purpose was to light up the stars in others. I found my strength not in the spotlight, but in the quiet solitude of my own heart. I found my true voice not in singing someone else's lyrics, but in speaking my own truth. I found my purpose not in applause, but in the grateful eyes of a woman who finally found the courage to leave a toxic relationship, or a young girl who finally learned to love her body through dance. Julian may have tried to end my story, but he only gave me a new beginning. He wanted to silence me, but he only made me louder. He wanted to take my life, but he only gave me a reason to truly live. And that, more than any criminal conviction, is the ultimate justice. The ultimate revenge is living a life so full of joy and purpose that the people who tried to break you become nothing more than a distant memory, a faded echo in a story you no longer belong to. My story is just one of many. What about yours? Have you ever had to trust your gut when everything told you to ignore it? Have you ever had to start over and rebuild your life from the ground up? Share your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe to my channel to join me on this journey of healing and hope.